Some people move through the world with a steadiness that feels almost unbreakable. Their faces calm, their voices even, their emotions quiet and distant, as though held beneath a thick layer of protective glass. To others, they appear composed, mature, unshaken by difficulties that leave most people trembling. But the truth within them is softer and far more fragile. They do not stay calm because life is easy. They stay calm because they once learned that feeling too much could swallow them whole. So they numb their feelings, gently, silently, consistently, not to avoid life, but to survive it. This is the story of those who learned to silence their emotional world in order to remain in control. A story shaped by fear, protection, and the longing for safety in a world that once felt overwhelming to feel. Chapter 1: Quiet. Art of Not. Fear. Emotional numbing rarely begins with a decision. It begins with a moment when someone feels too much and the feeling overwhelms their ability to cope. From that moment forward, the heart learns a subtle trick, a way to quiet the noise inside. At first, numbing is almost invisible, a tightening of the jaw, a quieter tone, a calmness that looks admirable to others but feels like distance on the inside. You may see someone who appears composed in conflict, untouched by chaos, unshaken by disappointment. They seem grounded, capable, in control. But what you cannot see is the small emotional door they learned to close. Each time life asked too much of them, that door becomes instinct. They shut it without thinking. They feel the first ripple of sadness and turn the volume down. They sense anger rising and flatten it before it reaches the surface. Joy appears briefly, but even joy gets dimmed, because intense joy carries the threat of intense loss. To numb feelings is not to erase them. It is to silence them enough that the heart does not drown. People who numb themselves often speak softly. They choose their words carefully. Their faces reveal little. Their emotions stay tucked behind control, because control has become their comfort. They avoid vulnerability, because vulnerability means allowing emotions to exist without a lid. They appear self-sufficient, but inside, there is a quiet loneliness, a loneliness created not by the absence of people, but by the absence of their own emotional presence. Still, numbing becomes their craft. The calm exterior becomes their shield, and in a world that admires composure, their silence is often mistaken for strength. But beneath the stillness is a story waiting to be understood, a story that begins long before adulthood, a story shaped by rawness they were never taught how to hold. Chapter 12: The Need for Control. BGA. And every emotionally numb person was once a child who felt too deeply, a child who did not have the support needed to process overwhelming emotions. Emotional shutdown often begins in early life. Maybe their home was unstable, and expressing emotions made everything worse. Maybe they had caregivers who grew distant when feelings became too big. Maybe they were told to toughen up, to stay quiet, to stop crying. Maybe their pain was dismissed as dramatic. Maybe their joy was too loud for someone who did not know how to celebrate it. Or perhaps their sadness was met with discomfort, a discomfort that taught them the world was not a safe place to feel openly. In these early environments, the child learns fast: feel less, show less, need less, because needing too much leads to disappointment, and disappointment becomes unbearable. Some children learn that their emotions overwhelm the people around them, so they shrank those emotions to protect the fragile adults who were meant to protect them. Others learn that love was conditional. Happiness was welcomed, but tears were not. Accomplishments were praised, but vulnerability was ignored. Slowly, the child becomes emotionally muted, not by force, but by survival. They enter adolescence already trained to hide their inner world. They become the quiet teenager, the one who refuses to burden others, the one who carries heartbreak silently. By adulthood, emotional numbing is their second skin. They no longer think about suppressing their feelings. Their body does it automatically. But beneath the numbness lies a sensitive heart, a heart that learned, long ago, that silence was safer than expression. This chapter reveals the roots of their control, the early moments that taught them that to fear was risky, and to feel openly was dangerous. Chapter 3: Science of Emotional Numbing. The act of numbing emotions may feel like a choice, but it is often an unconscious reaction shaped by the brain. When someone experiences emotional overload, the nervous system activates protective responses. The body shifts into survival mode. One of these responses is dissociation, a gentle form of leaving oneself. not physically, but emotionally. The mind creates distance between the self and the feeling, reducing intensity. Another response is emotional blunting. The brain reduces activity in regions responsible for processing emotions, especially the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. This is not intentional, it is biological. The body senses danger in intense emotion, so it numbs the experience to keep the person functioning. Chronic stress also plays a role. When the nervous system stays activated for too long, emotional circuits become fatigued, feelings lose their sharpness, joy loses its shine, sadness becomes dull rather than raw. People who numb their emotions also develop cognitive habits. They avoid thinking about their pain, they distract themselves, they stay busy, they intellectualize emotions instead of feeling them. This creates a psychological detour. Instead of experiencing emotion directly, they analyze it from a safe distance. They explain what they feel without actually feeling it. Over time, this becomes a lifestyle. Their emotional world becomes quiet. Their reactions become muted. Their internal life becomes dimmed to prevent overwhelm. But numbing comes with a cost. When you mute sadness, you mute joy. When you silence fear, you silence excitement. When you bury pain, you bury connection. Emotional numbness protects, but it also isolates. It keeps someone safe, but it also keeps them far from the depth of their own humanity. This chapter uncovers the machinery behind the numbness, the mind's attempt to keep itself safe by staying distant from the very feelings it was meant to hold. Chapter 4: Inner conflict of the composed Owen. Inside, emotionally numb people lives a conflict they rarely talk about. On the surface, they seem calm, controlled, unmoved by emotional waves. But underneath, two opposing forces quietly collide. One part longs to feel, to cry, to love, to be moved, to be honest. Another part fears that feeling will drown them. That emotion will break their carefully built stability. They live in a tension between desire and fear. They want connection, but fear being vulnerable. They want closeness, but fear losing control. They want understanding, but cannot open enough to be understood. This creates a loneliness that feels unsolvable, a loneliness made not by lack of people, but by lack of access to themselves. They may lie awake at night sensing something missing. They may ache for intimacy, but freeze when someone gets too close. They may want to express their feelings, but find the words stuck somewhere. Far beneath the surface, anger becomes silence, sadness becomes fatigue, joy becomes neutrality, fear becomes detachment. Their emotional responses flatten, not because they do not care, but because caring feels too intense to endure. Inside them is a deep exhaustion, the exhaustion of holding everything in, the exhaustion of staying composed even when their heart longs to collapse. This chapter lingers in that internal contradiction, the struggle of wanting to live fully while staying numb enough to survive. It is the conflict of a heart that wants to feel, inside a mind that has learned it must stay still. Chapter 5: At moment, something breaks. For people who numb themselves. Emotional breakthroughs rarely happen loudly. They happen quietly, in moments that slip through the cracks of their defenses. It may be a sudden burst of tears they did not expect. It may be a conversation that reaches too deep. It may be a moment of loneliness that becomes too heavy to ignore. It may be the tenderness of someone who sees them more clearly than they want to be seen. In these moments, the emotional wall develops a hairline fracture, a sensation escapes, a feeling rises, a memory returns. They experience an emotion in its raw form, and it reminds them of something they had forgotten, that they are human, they have depth. That numbness is not freedom. That beneath the composed exterior lives a heart still, capable of breaking and healing. These moments can be frightening. They can feel like losing control. They can feel like a wave breaking through a dam. But they can also feel relieving, like a breath long held finally being released, like waking from a long sleep. The breakthrough does not fix everything. It does not erase years of learned restraint, but it opens a space where emotion is no longer the enemy, a space where the heart begins to remember itself. This chapter captures the turning point, the subtle moment when numbness cracks and feeling becomes inevitable. Chapter 6: Learning to feel without fear. Once the emotional wall cracks, the journey shifts from suppression to gentle opening. This process is slow, tender, unpredictable. Feeling, again, does not mean being overwhelmed. It means learning to sit with your emotions rather than running from them. People who numb themselves begin to allow small amounts of feeling into their lives. They let sadness surface in brief moments. They allow joy to touch them instead of brushing it away. They learn to name what they feel, even if the words come out hesitantly. They learn to breathe through discomfort instead of shutting it down. Trust becomes essential. Trust in themselves. Trust that feelings will not destroy them. They begin to find safety in connection. They notice who listens gently. They notice who respects their pace. They notice that vulnerability, when held carefully, does not weaken them but makes them more real. Slowly, their emotional world awakens, not in a flood, but in steady waves. They learn that feeling does not mean losing control. It means being alive. This chapter explores that careful re-entry into emotional existence, the slow, steady return to a life where numbness is no longer the only way to stay safe. Chapter 7th, Freedom of a Heart. That WAKS in the final chapter, the story comes full circle. Emotional numbness once kept them safe, but now, they begin to understand the beauty of feeling again. Not intensely, not dramatically, but honestly, softly, fully. They discover that control is not the same as peace. That calmness is richer when it includes emotion rather than the absence of it. They learn that a heart that feels can also survive. That vulnerability is not a threat, but a bridge, a way to connect with themselves and others. They begin to experience joy without fear, sadness without collapse, love without retreat. That the freedom comes not from resisting emotion, but from allowing it gently. They no longer need to numb the world to stay in control. Their strength becomes softer, their calm becomes real, their humanity becomes whole. The story ends, not with a loud revelation, but with the quiet truth: a numb heart can wake, and when it does, the world becomes vivid again.